Welcome to Microdose Psychedelic Insights, powered by the Conscious Fund. This is the Psychedelic Insider series, fireside chats with industry leaders in the psychedelic space.
There we go.
Okay, yeah, so at Journey CoLab, we are developing a portfolio of naturally occurring psychedelics for the treatment of addictions. We're starting with mescaline, which is found in the peyote cactus, the wachuma cactus, and others that has been traditionally been used by indigenous communities for many thousands of years for the treatment of alcohol use disorder. We're doing it through a new kind of company, what we call a stakeholder model, where we've taken 10% of the founding equity of the company and placed that in a irrevocable purpose trust, where by irrevocable we mean that we can't take the equity back, and by purpose that it's for the purpose of serving the land and the people that the medicine comes from, for conserving the land and the plants that these medicines come from, and to support the therapists and partners that will be necessary to safely and effectively deliver psychedelic medicine. We believe that what we both know from traditional and ancient practices, as well as what the contemporary Western research shows us, is that psychedelics are safe and effective when delivered by trained professionals in a safe clinical environment. And so we are very much proponents of psychedelic assisted therapy. So the idea of using psychedelics in combination with therapy and community support for the treatment of addictions, where we have not in many decades really seen any improvement in how we're treating patients. And unfortunately, we are failing those patients now. And so it's the idea of bringing the known potential of psychedelics to cure or to treat, I should say, intractable mental health diseases like addiction, and apply that to how we treat addictions.
So addiction is your main focus for the moment?
That's right. Yeah, and when we started, that came from a number of places. One, we wanted to be additive to the psychedelic ecosystem. There's a lot of great work happening in depression and in trauma, but saw a need to translate these therapies into the addiction space from the communities that we want to serve. Particularly, we're a company made up of people of color, indigenous health advocates, people from the queer community, where those communities face longstanding issues around racial trauma, around homophobia, and we have a clear message from those communities that addiction is one area that we can help there. But it goes beyond that, in that there's a lot of suffering happening with addiction. The current treatments don't work well. And while it in many ways can be a harder market to work into, that it's where the most need is. And so it was a very clear message from our constituents, as well as the natural occurring products that we work with, that this large unmet clinical need is where we should focus.
And you guys are based, where are you based?
We're based in San Francisco. So we have like many companies in the pandemic are remote first. But we have a core team in San Francisco, but we have people across the country.
And so you consider yourself a drug development company, or is it like a multi-pronged approach, or how do you think of yourself?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I mean, maybe I'll take one step back in that I never thought I would start a psychedelic drug company ever. So I know it's very in vogue now. But I am very much a product of a traditional Muslim community. So my family doesn't drink. I'm very much a product of the war on drugs. Even I'm from Canada, but even there we had this fries your brain approach to it. And I only came to this through my own mental health journey. So after many years, I'm an MD PhD. I know how to probably better than most know how to navigate from a clinical perspective and a scientific perspective their own mental health. And even with that ability to navigate it and trying the best therapies we had, I always struggled with my mental health. And it always felt like I was drowning in my mental health, and the antidepressants or the talk therapy or the workshops, it always just felt like someone threw me a life preserver to keep my head above water, but I never fully got out of it. And, I wish I could say that I came to psychedelics out of some psychedelic medicine through some sense of enlightenment or being able to see ahead of the curve. But for me, it was just desperate for something that really did work. And, very fortunately, I was able to, receive psychedelic medicine treatments. And that completely changed my life, like many people. And as I started to learn more about the treatments, the barriers to access, becoming conscious about how the war on drugs has really targeted our communities, and that these traditional communities are the only ones that have successfully integrated these powerful tools into their societies, eventually came to drug development, to your original question, understanding that where we could be most additive is to bring these traditional therapies and translate them into the clinical space. And that was first by working through drug development. So drug development is hard. It's very expensive. It's very challenging. Most biotech founders have to deal with just the FDA. We deal with all the regulatory bodies that we need to and cooperate with them, including the FDA, the DEA, and others. But there is a huge need to responsibly steward these medicines into clinical practice. And we think that doing it in the stakeholder model that we have gives us the governance and corporate structure to do that responsibly.
Yeah, no, it definitely sounds like, and I'm always heartened and I'm excited to see, we're building the foundations of this industry. So it's great to know that the kind of trailblazers and the people who are building the roots here are having these kind of considerations in mind. So,
and it comes down to ownership. Like, I think one of the reasons of how did we end up in drug development is that if we look at the cannabis industry, that is very different than the psychedelic industry. But one thing that is illustrative is that the history of cannabis very much is connected to communities of color. But if we look at who actually benefits from the commercialization of cannabis, who actually owns that wealth creation, it's abysmal how few people of color and communities of color benefit from that. So and another reason for us to take the harder route of drug development is that we feel very strongly, and if you look at our company is made of people of color, of indigenous peoples, of people from the queer community, that we need to be owners as well, not just consumers of this or distributors of what's happening. Real structural change comes through ownership, and the way we've built it in terms of who the company is and how the company is structured with the trust. It's, I think, for the first time that these communities have real ownership. And while pledges of future profits are a nice thing to have, and charitable efforts are important. There's a role for that, but real structural change comes through ownership. Investors know that, founders know that, employees know that, and we see the land and the people the medicine comes from, the ecosystem that will be delivering these therapies as equal stakeholders, and should have a share of the ownership as well.
Okay. Do you have specific plans for the ownership shares are in this trust, or is that determined?
So we've put 10% of the founding equity into this irrevocable trust. And the first thing we did was to make sure we did that before we raised any large funding. So, I think who matters in terms of what actually comes out of a company. And if we look at our company, it's a very diverse company, as I said a few times. We had Sam Altman as our seed investor, and that was a critical choice, in that Sam at the time had been transforming OpenAI from a company he's currently leading, from a nonprofit to a cat profit, a new structure that could think about how to include governance and wealth creation for more than just the traditional constituents. And so that allowed us to think about this stakeholder model and put this stakeholder model together with his approach. So the first thing we did is before we raised any equity funding was to put this into an irrevocable trust. And I'm glad we did that, because we actually did get some pushback from investors on like, well, why are you doing this? And I'm like, well, it's already done. So we can't take this money back. We can write whatever, and our current investors are very supportive of it. But we did get some pushback from some investors, just didn't understand why we would be sharing equity with traditional communities and the ecosystem that's coming forth. And so I'm very glad that we did that in an irrevocable trust, which means that the founding shares are there. We can't take them back. No future financing can revoke them. So that's one about ownership. And then the second piece is around control, is that it lives in this trust. Our head of impact, Sutton Kin, who is a Afro-Indigenous health advocate, is our first trustee. She'll be working to recruit other trustees, and they will control the trust and what happens with the equity. So, and that's also a big point, is that this is not something that we dictate. It's the community through the trustees who will decide what to do. And we have some early consensus in some things that are important to us all, which is around conservation of land, conservation of peyote and other plants. That's something that we can all agree on, and that we desperately need to make investments in early. So, this idea of like sharing ownership, or this structure that we have about sharing, and I even don't want to use the word sharing, the idea of including necessary stakeholders as owners at the beginning creates alignment for us in the things that we need to do. And it's been completely transformative in how we run the company, how we structured it, and to make sure that as we develop these very powerful compounds and therapies into society, that we have a governance structure that keeps us in mind that this needs to be safe and effective.
I like it. Yeah, I mean, on a personal note, I've always been thinking of ways to have this, mild anarchist revolutionary streak. So ways of restructuring how we do things, restructuring our motives and our models. I'm always into it.
And I want to make it clear, we are a for-profit company. We are here to make this as big of a company as possible. And by doing that, we make that 10% of founding equity valuable. The trust can decide how they want to share those benefits. We're in a process of consultation with community about how to do that. One thing that we've learned very clearly is that community is coming to us and saying, don't come with an empty hand, come with something to offer. So all of us are aligned now in advancing the company and its milestones. I think that by having these stakeholders as part of it, we create a better product and service. We create one that's safe and effective. We create one that appeals to ultimately, and obviously we're many years from this, when consumers or patients have a choice, that they'll choose one that embodies their values. But we're all aligned in creating ethical value in this company, so that trust has value and that can start disseminating that value.
Excellent. So that on the making money end of things, you guys are new. You guys have recently launched. We
started in 2020 and we recently completed our Series A in the summer, and we're well into our first program, which is Mescaline for alcohol use disorder. And we have a clear line of sight to getting into clinic next year.
Excellent. So your discovery stage?
So we actually, it was interesting. I'm a physician and a scientist. I did my PhD at Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. I very much believe in science and progress and improving with science the things that we've known for a while. Our perspective is, while drug discovery is important, there's additional cost to that. There's risk around it, and there's safety. And by risk and safety, I mean, while we can create new psychedelics, the brain is a very complex organism. We've learned to treat Alzheimer's in rats many times. That does not mean we've been able to translate something into humans. And there's also a safety concern as well, in that, especially on the heels of learning what traditional corporate structures have led to in the opioid crisis, where we were told that OxyContin was a new and safe opioid when that was patently false. what we're seeing in the amphetamine crisis that's coming through. We have less understanding, but beginning to understand that, is that I'm not saying that we should not do discovery, but the question is, can we trust traditional structures not to do what happened in these previous waves or classes of drugs? And so we're focused on translating natural occurring compounds that humans have used for thousands of years, have a clear safety profile. There is direct observational evidence that in these settings, when done with therapy, when combined with support, that we can see clinical outcomes. That is the safest, most effective, and fastest route to get safe and effective psychedelic therapy into the hands of as many patients, as many families as possible.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you're not interested in next generation or second generation. You're at the moment, for the moment, focused on kind of first generation mescaline.
We are focusing our efforts on how to translate psychedelic therapies to addiction. That begins with first generation compounds, and it's actually been interesting that what I can share is that with how we've built the company, with who's in it, we've got a lot. It is heartening to see that is, people do care. And so we do see other groups coming to us in terms of potentially licensing of their compounds, where they're focusing on discovery or new things. And we're focused on how to make sure that it is in both with our structure and how we're governed, and the infrastructure building, that it can be done safe and effectively. Because I think nobody wants to, well, I'll put it this way. There are more and more people who ask themselves, do I want to be the Sacklers of the psychedelic space? And they're asking some of the questions like, okay, how do we both innovate, but also have governance structures and incentives that keep safety in mind, not only for the individual, but for us as we bring these into our societies. And I always go back to the only societies that have done that effectively are indigenous communities, where they have safely and effectively incorporated this into their culture. So there's a lot for us to learn there. So as we've positioned ourselves to be reciprocal with those communities and communities of color and other communities that have safely introduced these agents, it is heartening to see that we're getting other groups coming to us, and we're very early in those discussions, but what it would look like to bring in second or third generation psychedelics through a governance and corporate structure that is focused not only on commercialization, but safety and governance and safety and efficacy.
Okay, so you could see yourself perhaps incorporating some of the studies that are out there that say that communal settings or ceremonial settings seem to have better results in terms of delivering drugs. Do you see yourself more of a holistic view of the delivery? I mean, if we're rather than just discovering something novel, taking something that's classic or first generation, and delivering it in finding the optimal and best settings for the delivery of these medicines. Is that part of your view?
Yeah, I think that again, I'm all for innovation, and I think there's room for discovery of new compounds that are not hallucinogenic, that have shorter acting periods. These tailored custom psychedelics, and the jury's still out. Will they work? But I do think that there will be some segment of the population that will respond to that. But what we do know is that the psychedelic agent is not enough. If it was, everybody who went to a festival and took a bunch of psychedelics would come back cured. But unfortunately, and there are reports of a small amount of people who do that. But for most people, what we see is required is psychedelic assisted therapy, where it's part of therapy, community support, this more integrated model. And when we add when you add psychedelic agents to an integrated model, it is transformative. So that's known. We've known that. Traditional communities have known that for thousands of years. Early Western research before the war on drugs and prohibition showed that, and all the clinical trials are showing that. So we're focused on the fact that is the most effective and safest way to be able to deliver these therapies. It also we're excited about this idea of psychedelics psychedelic medicine ushering in a healing economy where it's not just a distant corporate structure that is capturing all the benefits through a daily medication, where it is in people's communities. They are working with local practitioners in local centers. And I'm very excited for a world where we spend a lot of our economy and we spend a lot of people's time and effort healing each other and being there for each other. We're trying to do that now, but the tools we just have are incredibly ineffective and frustrating. And I know on both ends of the stethoscope that providers and clinicians are frustrated, and the patients and the families that they serve are frustrated. And it's not just about bringing psychedelic medicine to our existing system, but reimagining and being hopeful about what does a healing economy look like? Where is an economy where we have humans in the loop? They're an important part of this, that like community support is an important part of this. We're spending so much on healthcare, on mental health care. We're spending so much on addictions and it's not working. If we could apply that to, I keep on saying this term, this healing economy, I think that's a very exciting vision of the future for psychedelic medicine.
I like it. I got a bit excited myself. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk about that it's not just about delivery of the medicine, it's psychedelic therapy. It's therapy with the medicine, and which is great. And I'm really happy that most people in the industry realize that we're not just going to, or we don't want to just be delivering people pills to take. But there is a lot of people are focused on this kind of therapist to patient model, which is great. And it seems like psychedelics does need this. It does run into some logistical bottlenecks, some scaling bottlenecks. What does seem to be missing is I haven't heard anyone speak of this wider communal ceremonial delivery of future medicine. It seems to be the clinic model, the one-on-one, perhaps a therapist with a group at the most, just to help with scalability. But I haven't heard many people speaking about the delivery aspect in bringing in the community and bringing in the ceremony. So it seems like that works. It's part of the tradition. It helps the results, apparently. And on the business end, there's a need for it. I haven't seen anyone who's kind of going down this kind of focus in terms of delivery. So yeah, if you guys are looking at that angle, then good on you, because
I mean, what I'll say is I think that like the problem is so great, both from a mental health issue, I mean, as well as from a social justice issue, like the efforts around decriminalization, the impact that that's had on mass incarceration. These are not, we do not see these in conflict. In fact, that they can work in parallel and they can support each other. From our perspective, and this is my perspective as a clinician, is that there always will be people who have a higher need of level of care, who have had some trauma in their life or chronic trauma in their life, who will need trained professionals with deep expertise in safe environments. And in addition to what's happening in these other fronts, that we need to have that, so that when someone either comes into that directly or comes through another parallel system, that support is there for them. Like it's absolutely crucial that higher levels of care are available. And this is what we see, this might be a bit of too far of an analogy, but if you have problems, like we're talking about people's minds and their mental health, but if you look at someone's knee, there are people who just want to have a stronger knee, where going to a yoga class or going to some sort of some sort of peer-led class is enough for them. There's some people who had an injury and they need to go higher level of care, like to a physical therapist or an occupational therapist. There's some people who have, a very traumatic event or long-standing degenerative disease, where those earlier pieces may not be a fit for them. In fact, could cause more harm to go into. Like you have someone who just suffered, a knee accident going straight into yoga. There are ways where it can be done, but in some cases they need to have surgical intervention first. And I look at our mental health very similarly, where there will always be people who need to have a higher level of care, and at the same time, we as a society and culture need to think about what are other ways for people to get other access, where it's not just this high level of care. And we have a well-articulated system where someone could go from a knee surgery, then go into rehab, and then eventually be doing yoga. Like, what does that look like in the mental health version of this analogy? And how can someone who goes into, say, a yoga class and is like, ooh, you know what, like my knee can't actually handle this. It's a little more fragile than I thought. Like, can I move quickly up and get the higher levels of intervention so I can eventually go back to that? So we're focused on this higher level of care. And for some people, they will, a lot, like I think about, my parents, I think about the communities I come from, where a lot of them have been targeted by the war on drugs. There's a large fear because the war on drugs has attacked us, that and there's a lot that needs to be fixed in the medical system, but that could be a safe way for them to access that.
Yeah, definitely. Well said, my friend.
Yeah, I don't know if the knee analogy works for you. I kind of think about it.
No, it does, because we have layers and different tiers of options for physical healing and mental healing. They're few and far between, and they lack access, and we lack options. So there's definitely a need to catch up the healing economy to where others, other parts of this are. So all right, cool, man. So drug development, you're still private, so you can't disclose too much in terms of finances, but you've done a seed A, you said, a round A?
We did a seed with Sam Altman's Apollo Projects Fund, and recently did a Series A in this summer, closed this summer.
Excellent. Okay. Plans, milestones? What's
we're going through the FDA path, which in one way is there is it's a challenging path, but there is that's matched by that, it's a clear execution and milestones on that. So we're moving ahead to that, and we're as I said before, have a very clear path to being in the clinic and beginning human clinical trials next year.
Cool. Public is in the future, or are you thinking about going public yet? Is that something you foresee?
I would take that question back to the mission in terms of like, how do we have the funding in place to get through the FDA process? How does that fit into the governance model and values that we have? And both private and public financing seem to fit in there, but obviously the devil's in the details. But we're currently private, and we'll continue that way until it makes sense for us to do a public financing.
Excellent. All right. Thanks for the time, man. I appreciate it.
I hope there's something in there for you to use.
Plenty. Okay. Tons of stuff. All right. Will I see you in Miami?
I will. You will. Yeah, I'd love to connect there.
Excellent. All right. A little company.
Yeah, and I think we bring a diverse set of voices with who's in the company, also how we're doing it. So
can I find that on your website? Like, where can I get some additional material? Or feel free to send me over, email over, whatever you feel comfortable.
Yeah, on our website it has our team, our structure, what we're doing with the trust. But we're very intentional in terms of how we set up the company and who's in it, how we're doing it. So I am very happy to jump on another call if you want to do video to share that, because I think we need to show that there can be different voices in the psychedelic startup space, and that when we have those voices, we do really innovative things, and those things can lead to more inclusive and I think more successful companies.
All right. Appreciate it, and we'll be in touch.
I'll see you in Miami, and feel free to just reach out if you want any follow up, or is there anything else I can add to the conversation.
Excellent. All right. Take care. Yeah.
Thanks for joining the Psychedelic Insiders series, brought to you by Microdose and the Conscious Fund. Visit our website at www.microdose.buzz.